Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon. So the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about sibling sexual abuse. For those of you who don't know who we are, SARSAS, Somerset, Avon and Rape and Sexual Abuse Support are, as the name suggests, an organisation that works across Avon and Somerset supporting survivors, adult survivors of sexual violence, whilst also advocating and campaigning for change towards a world where everybody lives free from harm of sexual violence. We have been part of, since 2020, a national sibling sexual abuse project, and that's what I'm going to kind of introduce you to today. You'll notice I'm definitely a kind of more is less kind of person when it comes to slides, so there's lots of information on the slides, which I'm not going to go through it all in the 10 minutes. I wanted to have that there to offer for you to go and look at afterwards, and delve into any areas that feel particularly relevant for you and your roles, or that you're particularly interested in. So please do take a look afterwards in a little bit more detail. I'm going to talk about what sibling sexual abuse is. We're going to talk about a little bit about the research and the findings and the recommendations that came out of the sibling sexual abuse projects. And then I'm going to talk about some of the resources that we have at SARSAS that came out of that work. So I'm going to start by talking about in terms of definitions. Now, obviously, as with all forms of sexual abuse and violence, definitions are limited. Everybody's experiences are nuanced and complex. But one of the things that we found when we started the work of this project back in 2020 is that there wasn't really many kind of standardized information around definitions of sexual abuse. So some of the definitions that our work told us were helpful for people were to establish that sibling sexual abuse is obviously abuse that occurs in the same biological family, within the same biological family, or people living within the same house. And it is included but not limited to siblings, half siblings, step siblings, foster and adoptive siblings, or cousins who have a sibling-like relationship. And of course, when we're talking about sibling sexual abuse, we have to be very conscious and sensitive and sympathetic to the fact that we are talking about young people and children, both in terms of those who display sexual harmful behaviours and those that are victims of that behaviour. And so we're looking at behaviour that goes beyond that kind of natural curiosity and age-appropriate sexual development. I'm not going to go into any detail in that. There's a really useful link there if you want to look at it that kind of looks at that scale of typical problematic and harmful behaviour. But for the definition of sexual abuse, we are talking about harmful behaviour where one child is victimised by another, often involves that kind of power imbalance. It can include touching, but also non-touching activity. And it can be carried out and involve any gender. There's no universal definition of sibling sexual abuse, but the project that we were involved in summarised it as a form of harmful sexual behaviour or activity involving the misuse of power, a victimising intent or outcome between children who self-identify as siblings. And so the project that we were involved in started in 2020, and at that time we were really keen to get involved because there was a real lack of awareness and information about research around sibling sexual abuse. It was, and to a certain extent still is, one of the kind of ultimate taboos in terms of talking about sexual violence, particularly in the context of CSA. And so what did we know back in 2020? We, from the research that we did at that time, we knew that it was the most common form of childhood sexual abuse in our homes. That was quite a surprising statistic to me at the time because there wasn't many statistics around. It wasn't something that was talked about, but the most common form of sexual abuse. And it is estimated to be 3 to 5 times more likely that a child will be sexually abused by a sibling rather than a parent. The impact of sibling sexual abuse, we know, is all forms of sexual abuse and sexual violence have significant impact, but the kind of developmental, emotional, physical consequences for children who have been harmed by a sibling were shown as being particularly impactful and prevalent. And that's because the abuse is likely to start at a much younger age and is likely to go on for a longer duration than other forms of abuse. But despite this, at the time that we did this research, sibling sexual abuse continued to be underreported, minimised, not picked up by professionals. And this was really the motivation back in 2020 to get involved in the national project. So as part of this initial project, there was a survey on sibling sexual abuse undertaken by Red Crisis England and Wales, which engaged 718 professionals through 26 interviews. So it was a significant piece of research. And the two real key areas that came out of that research was a clear indication that there was a lack of societal and professional awareness around sibling sexual abuse. So, for example, 85% of the professionals that we interviewed stated that there were high levels of recognition for parental child sexual abuse, but only 46% for sibling sexual abuse. And the statistics were similar around kind of societal awareness. There were some other kind of contextual factors that came out of that research. So it did seem that there may have been an increase in incidents of sexual abuse over COVID. We've learned that since. And 90% of professionals agreed that there was significant stigma and shame that existed around sexual abuse. I'm going to skip this slide for the purpose of the time, but there was some more of the complexities around sibling sexual abuse. Some of them I have alluded to, so I'd invite you to have a look at that slide if you want to have some more insight into those kind of complexities. But I'm keen to get onto the kind of research and the support that's available. So through this research, we identified areas of improvement and increased awareness and support that needed to happen. It was evident there's further research needed. There were still big gaps in what we knew about sibling sexual abuse and its prevalence. There was an incredible need to raise awareness, and so that kind of dialogue in society in general. We've moved on a little bit since then, but it is still a subject that you do not hear talked about very often at all in terms of kind of the media and society in general. There was definitely a need for an increase of provision of specialist support services and an increased need for training and recognition around responses and prevention for parents and professionals. And so the project was launched in 2020, originally funded by the Home Office, and for those first couple of years was very much around the research that I've been talking about, delivered in partnership with one of our Red Crisis partners in Mercia and two universities that helped facilitate that research. It was the largest funded project that had ever been taken on sibling sexual abuse, and the outcomes of that, kind of unsurprisingly, but really important, were a need for increased provision in terms of support and an increased improvement in the kind of continuity, consistency and quality of support for both children and adult survivors. It's worth mentioning this project was particularly around supporting adult survivors. And I think the previous speaker alluded to one of the things that really heavily came out of that research was how long it takes survivors to come forward. We know in general around sexual violence that average is around 27 years, but the research told us it was much, much longer for victims of sibling sexual abuse. At the very heart of the work that we've done around sibling sexual abuse has been survivor involvement. We've had a survivor advisory panel that have genuinely kind of shaped and influenced and informed the direction of support services, of information, of research. So it was really important today to make sure we included that kind of survivor voice within what we're talking about today. And so just to pick out one of these quotes, one of our survivors told us that the first time I tried to disclose 18 years after it happened, the person said to me, "Don't make this into something bigger than it is." We know that there are many barriers to disclosure for all forms of sexual violence, but there are particular complicating factors around survivors coming forward around sibling sexual abuse, which include not recognising the behaviour abuse as abuse at the time, not realizing that this is something that just doesn't normally happen in families and believing that's something that happens in all families, grooming, secrecy, and that feeling coming in, really heard this feeling from survivors of feeling complicit or responsible, which of course really plays into those feelings of guilt and shame and fear of not being believed. And really strong in that evidence was that fear of family reactions or family breakdowns. What is going to be the wider impact of this if I tell somebody, on the other people in my life that are around me and support me? And so out of the research, there were a number of areas at SARSAS that we have funded and taken forward to try and kind of break this cycle and raise this awareness around these particular areas. And I've just put some links on this slide for you to take forward. Areas around research. We've been looking to influence policy. A very large part of the work we do is around increasing awareness, making sure we're keeping that narrative in terms of social media, in terms of policy, in terms of the wider media, training professionals in terms of responding to disclosures and supporting adults. But central to all this, the slide there that you really want to look at if you look at this afterwards, is our website. So we've developed a website specifically around sibling sexual abuse. And so I just really quickly want to take you through some of the resources on there. So the website, Sibling Sexual Abuse, the title there is a link to the actual website. It's a dedicated space primarily for professionals supporting survivors of sibling sexual abuse and survivors themselves. There's lots of resources, including some trauma and self-care online courses, downloadable self-help guides. Really key to this website are lots of survivor stories and blogs, and that's really, really important because, again, that's a space where survivors can go. They can have a sense of that feeling that they're not on their own in their experiences and connect with other survivors' experiences. And that was a really large part of what our advisory group told us was important to them. There's lots of kind of guides around the use of language, because that was quite a big thing that came out of the research at the start, was that difficulty in terms of using the correct language, and that being a barrier for both survivors and professionals. Lots of signposting to research to other resources, but at the heart of the website is our community forum. So I just wanted to finish by talking about that. So the community forum is an online chat facility that anyone can log into. It's not therapy, it's not support, but it is a community forum where survivors can connect. Many of the people that use our services, particularly through our helpline, have never spoken to anybody else with similar experiences, with similar lived experience, and it is such an important part of a survivor's journey. So having a forum where you can connect, talk about experiences, talk about challenges, but also talk about that kind of hope and those kind of triumphs in terms of recovery. And also they're kind of signposting, sharing resources with each other as well. And it's moderated, it is, in terms of safety and moderation, a moderator is active throughout the week. So they're not present all the time, but we do monitor that space to make it safe. And our aim really through that kind of community space is around fostering empowerment, connection, and a real sense of being seen, heard, and supported. I'm going to stop there and take a breath because that's come to the end of the presentation. A real whistle-stop tour. I nearly got the smile there, Steve, didn't I? I can see it. A whistle-stop tour of our services. So please do go and look at the resources on the website, and hopefully that'll be of use to everyone in whatever your capacity of being here today is.